Good morning. Thank you for listening to WXOX 97.1 FM in Louisville, Kentucky. This is Artists Talk with LVA, and I'm your host, Keith Waits. The show is produced by Louisville Vision. I have two old friends of the show. I think I know Dave's been on a couple times. I know we talked, Brook, we talked to you a while ago, but I'll tell you who they are. Brook White Jr. discovered his passion for hot glass under the tutelage of Stephen Rolfe Powell at Center College, and that's what we've come here to talk about today. Brook has worked with artists and visited glass centers around the world. He has garnered many honors, including a 1998 Kentucky Arts Council Al Smith Fellowship, the Owensboro Mayor's Award of Excellence in 2001, the 2003 Center College Distinguished Young Alumni Award, and inclusion in the 2005 Leadership Kentucky class. In 2004, the Kentucky Arts Council commissioned him to create that year's Governor's Awards in the Arts. His glass is in galleries across the country and in the collections of the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., the Huntington Museum of Art, and the Asheville Art Museum. His blown glass art installations are featured in many private collections and public buildings throughout the Midwest. Dave Caudill creates artworks for public, corporate, and private collections. His larger public works are found at Louisiana's Rip Van Winkle Gardens, East Tennessee's Horizon Center Park, the University of Kentucky's Singletary Center for the Arts, and the University of Louisville School of Music. Corporate collections featuring David's work include Brown-Forman Corporation and Fire King International. Individual collectors across America have acquired his work far and wide. Now, we're here today to talk about a special project that these two guys just did together, which was to create a memorial sculpture and surrounding park. We'll have them go into more detail about it, in recognition of Stephen Powell, who passed away in 2019. I haven't seen it in person, haven't been to Danville yet, but the pictures I've seen, it looks pretty spectacular and also exactly right, if I may say so, for honoring this artist. So, Brook, let's start with you. And I didn't really, let me just say too, you are the founder and you run Flame Run in the Glassworks. I don't know what the building's called now, but down there on Market Street, you run probably the biggest glass studio in Louisville, I would guess, right?
I run the biggest glass studio in Kentucky and in the region.
Yeah.
And we're at the corner of 9th and Market, which was known as the original Glassworks building.
Yeah. So where did this idea start? What's the first note of this project?
Of this actual project, the first note started when I received a phone call that Steve Powell had passed away. And it was a shock. It was not even something I even registered. They said Steve died. And I'm like, Steve who? Because I never thought of Steve Powell passing away in any way, shape, or form. And yes, he was human, but he was larger than life in many ways. Then we have to fast forward to a year past his death, and we all knew it was coming. It was the week of sort of the anniversary of that first of his death, not the first, but of his death. And one of the guys in the studio, John Stokes, we all knew what was going on. Everybody felt the vibe. And he said, is there a physical marker anywhere for Steve? And I said, I don't think so. No, he was cremated. The family did some cool things with the ashes, and no. And then he kind of sulked and walked away, but he turned back and looked at me. He said, there should be something somewhere. And that's when the lightning bolt struck me. And literally within 10 seconds of that whole back and forth, I ran out of the studio and said, I'll be back. And I was calling his wife. Mm-hmm. And I called Shelley Powell and said, I have this crazy idea of doing something for Steve on campus at Center. Would you be willing to let us do that? We want your blessing. I need your approval. And she said, go for it. And that's when the clock started running right then.
So did you have some sort of vision in mind, or did you just have that sense of mission that you had to accomplish it, but you had no idea where it would go in terms of what kind of?
At that exact moment, it was literally an idea. It was a rambling conversation. It could be the first thing I saw was a wrought iron bench, like you see in many parks and many places around the world. And there was a little bitty plaque that said, in honor of Steve Powell. And it almost made me sick to my stomach. I was like, I looked around my studio, I looked around at the people. I was like, we're all freaking artists. we can do something better than this. And I didn't even know what I was talking about. And I told her that. I said, a sculpture, a garden, something. And she basically gave me the blessing of the family. So that was where we started.
Well, how soon did you get in touch with Dave Caudill?
It was actually probably 6 or 8 months into the process. I started calling people, friends, the Glass family, so to speak, collectors, people that I knew that cared and loved about Steve. And it was an amazing process. And this thing could have gone off the rails at any 100 points in the way, but every conversation was affirmation. This sounds like it's something worthy to do, and go for it. Now, those people may not have donated specifically, but they gave me energy, and it just kept building and building. And Steve was a famous, I would say, to speak, not only glassblower but tennis player in the region, and he played lots of tennis. And I went to talk to his tennis buddies in Lexington, and they challenged me to think about this in a bigger way. How do you actually capture a little bit of Steve's essence? And I was like, oh. And then the next question was, how much does something like this cost? And I was like, well, if we raise more money, we can do more, right?
Right.
So I realized at that conversation, I didn't know what I was talking about other than just having the passion. And that really made me draw it back in to circle the wagon, so to speak.
Well, and it, I never know if it's appropriate, but I think in a sense, like, so what was the budget for this? Because this is a pretty large project.
We were able, there is a scholarship, which is a completely separate thing at the center now for Steve. And there was over $100,000 raised for that. And that will help send a student to a summer class and broaden their horizons. But for this specific project that we're talking about, it was over 400,000.
Okay.
And we never made it public. That's what was the magic and beauty of, all I had to do was talk about Steve, and everybody told me their Steve stories, because Steve impacted them in some way, did something tiny in Steve's world for them, but it made an impact. And every conversation helped propel the project.
Well, Dave Caudill, I don't want to ignore you here for too long. So what I'm guessing you met Stephen. What kind of relationship did you have with him, if any, before while he was working?
We basically had met a few times. I wouldn't even call what we had a relationship, although we certainly were aware of each other. I was on the board of the Kentucky Museum of Art and Craft for several years. And so artists would be coming in and bringing work or whatever. And so I would bump into him. And at one point, a trip was scheduled for a bunch of board members to go down and watch Steve and the crew blow glass. So I was on that trip, and that was the first real exposure that I had to him. And then a bit later, Brian Klinkingbeard, who was a curator at the time, sent me to talk to Steve and ask him if he wanted to have a one-person show or a retrospective or something of that nature. And so I got a chance to spend a little bit of time with him, and he actually gave me some career advice. And so that was a lot of fun. And he was always a great guy to talk to. I never sensed that there was any aloofness that you might expect to get out of an artist who had achieved that kind of success, both in the quality of his work and the commercial success that he had. He was just a terrific person. And so when Brook approached me to ask if I would be interested in working on this, or how should he go about it, I jumped at the chance and thought, this is something I can sink my teeth into, something that's worth doing. And it's a big project that will take a certain amount of time, and that would be fun to do compared to the smaller projects that I typically do end to end, throughout the year. So that's basically how we got connected. And so Brook had a bunch of drawings, and some of them were sketches, others were computer graphics done by a fellow that he had recruited for this to just help develop the form, see what it could look like. And so the next step for me was to actually build a maquette and build it at the scale of 1 inch to 1 foot. And it would give me a chance to go through the fabrication process step by step and imagine that projected onto the big piece. And then it gave us a vehicle to show people and get a little more buy-in, and also start to work out some of the logistical issues that would arise.
So the piece, just for the benefit, particularly of radio listeners, that for the broadcast, it has a steel kind of frame, and
Right.
and roughly, maybe not roughly, but very, very closely resembles one of Stephen's pieces.
Right.
Yes.
So when Brook came to you, had the idea of the necessity of something like that steel frame already come up? Is that why he called you?
Right. Yeah. The form was pretty well established by the time I came into the picture. So Brook had designed it in addition to having the concept, and he knew what he wanted. And he knew he needed a guy who could work in stainless steel and do the curvilinear pieces that would be required to do this sculpture. And so that's how I came into the team, I think. Brook, you want to add anything to that?
Definitely. Your
ahead.
favorite phrase of mine is compound curve. We had a Steve picture. We actually took many pictures and took them off the internet of Steve's work. And it was tall, it was long, it was short, it was wide. But there was always this transition.
Right.
And then Dave goes, well, that's a compound curve. I'm like, well, that's sounds like a pretty complicated thing. And so Dave had other resources and other friends and contacts that were able to help us pull these things off. But where going back just a little bit was that I knew what I thought in my mind was that Steve and Dave were contemporaries. They showed at the Kentucky Museum of Art and Craft together back in the day. There were many group shows, and there'd be a Dave piece, there'd be a Steve piece, and they both kept getting larger and larger over the years. And I was like, you know, I know who that person is, and I'm working for this guy. So Dave was always in my mind, but my daughter goes to school at Walden School, where there's a Dave Caudill piece in the front as you come into the driveway.
Yeah.
And I had raised some money, had the ideas, and the person I thought was going to help us with the metal said, this is way too complicated for me. And I was like, whoa, okay, wait a minute. Now where am I? And it was about 2 days I was lost in this sea of who's going to help with the metal fabrication. And then I drove my daughter to school and saw the Dave piece. And I was like, I know that guy. So I called him and he was like, sure, I'll come down and talk. And that was October-ish of 2021. And we had approval from Center to start moving forward. Wasn't official yet, but it was like, keep moving. And the next thing I knew is I needed somebody like Dave.
Right. Somebody who had, made a large metal sculpture that was placed on the seafloor. And
Yeah.
Because I mean, when you talk about complicated, I think a lot of Dave's pieces are very simple and elegant, but then when he's gone to a larger scale, there is a level of complexity that, yeah, he could solve whatever problem, right?
Yes, and it was beautiful because I needed to be the project manager because we had a garden, we had the sculpture, we had 3 designer benches, and we had an outdoor classroom. So I was trying to find the specific people to help me do the things. And the best analogy is that I was assembling the Avengers. I needed a team of superheroes to pull this thing off. And I worked for Steve for more than a decade. And I saw him go from pieces that were about knee high, selling for $3,000, to pieces that were at my shoulders, selling for $30,000 in a decade. And how do you represent that? How do you symbolize that? And I knew it was beyond me, but I had that idea, and I needed a great team, and Dave was one of the biggest parts of that.
So it sounds like when Dave got involved, it sounds like maybe you already had some of these other concepts. You talk about the garden and the different things, the different elements of it. Did you immediately think you needed those elements? Did you immediately see that expansion of the location, the physical location?
Actually, yes, from the beginning. This was a space that I walked past hundreds and hundreds of times as a student working for Steve. And then Steve as a student, because he went to Center College in the 70s, and then he came back 12 years later as a professor. He would have walked through the same space thousands of times. And the original studio is on top of the roof of Wisiger Theater there at the Norton Center for the Arts. And it was symbolic because it was looking at that space. It was an area next to the biggest place that Center has. I mean, it's a beautiful, it's like the Kentucky Center for the Arts.
Mm-hmm.
It has a 1,500 seat theater. You can see Broadway shows there, and they hosted 2 vice presidential debates.
Right.
So it's a high profile area. That was my first pick, and Center said sure, and I was like, okay, what are we into now? So everything just kept building.
Well, and it's a walkway, right? It's a pathway, so people actually can walk through.
Yes.
The structure, and then that immediate area are the benches you talked about, are they inside of it? I should look at this picture again.
Yeah, there are 3 benches that I had in concept. In 2019, Center celebrated its 200th anniversary.
Right.
So the class of 2020 was the first class of Center's 3rd century. That's actually pretty profound if you think about it, and can filter the words. The class of 2020 knew they were special, so they started raising money, and they wanted to do a project on campus to celebrate Center's 3rd century. And then we had what nobody wants to say anymore, even, is COVID.
Mm-hmm.
The class of 2020 got sent home in March. They did not graduate officially. They did not have a ceremony. Everything shut down. They had raised internally within their class a significant amount of money. I went to Center and said, I got this crazy idea. And this was like literally 2 weeks before the world shut down, and said, what if we do a sculpture, a garden, something in honor of Steve Powell? And like, it sounds great, but, and everything got put on hold.
Right.
Fast forward a year and a half, I don't know how many conversations and whatever, the class of 2020 wanted to honor the connection between Center students and the faculty, because Center faculty invest so much in the students, and they wanted to memorialize that into Steve. And so they said, we're going to do this. So they gave the first donation of $30,000.
Cool.
To honor Steve specifically, but that connection between faculty and students. And that's where we took off.
Well, I'm looking, as you talked, I was looking just for my own reference at some of the images. There's a really good TikTok out there of the project that shows it at different times of the day and different angles and stuff. In the very center of the ground, there's a what looks like a glass piece. You could describe it for me, but right in the center, it looks like it goes down pretty deep, and that there is glass elements in there. Talk to me just a little bit about that particular element.
There were a lot of things with this project that happened just by osmosis. It was amazing. Steve's wife gave me 3 to 5 pieces that were damaged, were not going to be sellable. And my idea was that we have a mosaic, if you want to use that word, of shards of Steve's actual pieces. So this pit, so to speak, is directly in the center of the sculpture.
Mhm.
It's underneath the neck. And there are probably actually more than those 4 pieces, because we had other things at our access, probably 10 to 20 different Steve pieces literally there in the ground with a protective glass over top of it. And there were so many things that I realized I wanted to do, realized that were important, but I didn't understand the bigger symbolism of it. And that we in our group, we refer to it as the shard pit. So those are actual pieces of Steve's glass that are there that people can come up and see, and it's lit at night. It looks amazing during the day, and there's so much color, so much energy from these broken pieces. It's astounding to me, you know, every time I go back.
Right. Well, Dave, let me ask you for a second, just to stop being an artist for a second, and when you go to the site, like what sort of reaction do you have, just, you know, as a person, as somebody experiencing what's there now?
I think just wow is the most succinct way I can describe it. I think it's just a beautiful thing to see it in the vivid sunlight or under the street lamps on an overcast evening. Brooke came up with a great idea. I mean, it didn't need to have me add anything as an artistic element. It was all right there. And so I just enjoyed seeing it from all different perspectives. And it's interesting to me how much it changes, whether you're looking at it from the street or if you go around from the back and are looking up at it. What Brook has done with the lighting is just fascinating, because it just blows up all of that beautiful colored glass, and then there's lighting in the neck that changes color, and so it's a very slow, subtle thing, and it's just a captivating thing to stand and look at. So it's a combination for me of being very impressed, but yet feeling that it's a very sublime thing that I get a chance to see.
Well, is it, you know, some of the photographs, people are clearly interacting with it, but a lot of those photographs are people who were probably involved in some way in the project. And it seems to almost demand engagement from anybody coming through there. Has there been any kind of hesitancy about people not wanting to sit on the benches or not wanting to sort of take advantage of that almost spiritual quality to the location?
Not so far.
Okay.
I mean, it was funny because it was actually like we were trying to keep people away,
Yeah.
because Steve had this quality of drawing people in. And I came up with some idea. I approached people. People were telling me their Steve stories. And I finally realized my mission here was to capture the energy of these people, of this Steve story, to try to make this happen.
Right.
And this is by far the biggest thing I've ever attempted or thought of. But I realized that's what Steve taught me to do. And the phrase I used was, I'm going to do one last Steve project in true Steve style. And so many of his friends, so many of the donors, so many of the contributors, people everywhere have said, you got it. And I didn't even know that was possible. It's like, you know, how do you capture that energy and shoot it to the sky?
Mhm.
And my whole life has been blessed. I came to Center to play soccer. I met this crazy guy that did glass blowing. I got on his team. I got accepted to UK law school. I went back and worked for this crazy dude because, you know, I never had a real life in my job. Excuse me, exactly opposite, a real job in my life. But my life is that way, that things are backwards. It's been a blessing to hang out with this dude and get to say, you worked for C. Powell. And then I got to meet guys like Dave Caudill and all the other artists across Kentucky. And for anybody to want to be involved, to try to harness that energy, that was what I realized was my mission.
Were you able to, did other people that had been his student or worked with him help you or be involved in the project in any way?
Oh, definitely. I reached out to as many people as I could. Anybody listening to this that knows me, I'm a talker and I will admit it. But there were 2 or 3 weeks in a row that I lost my voice by Friday because I made so many phone calls and had told so many stories and heard so many stories. It was amazing. I brought 3 to 5 people out of retirement for this project. They're like, yeah, well, we're done with this. We're done with this. But the contractor, Bruce Cummings, who built Steve's house with his bare hands, he came back. Paul Hugus, who's had some physical injuries, bad knees, and these other things, had to quit doing glass blowing. He came back. Paul Nelson. It's just an amazing list of people that were like, we're in because it's for Steve.
Right. Well, Dave, I'll ask you this. It strikes me when, when Brook talks about how people say he nailed it, you sort of wonder, a lot of times memorials are done because somebody decides to spend the money and they put a call out and a bunch of sculptors or whatever respond who may or may not have ever had any kind of personal relationship with the subject. And I'm just sitting here thinking, like, what would a complete stranger have tried to do to pay tribute to Stephen Powell? And so it could only have been Brook White, right? To have done this way. No one else could have done it. And I guess that may seem obvious, right? It's an artist, it's an individual artist with a vision, right? But you've been involved in a lot of public commissions and things like that, I think, and like, I guess I'm sort of struggling for a question here, but I mean, it's like, it seems like a rare opportunity that an artist with so much connection to the person being paid tribute was able to do it. Does that seem like does that seem right to you? And does that seem uncommon to you? That's, I guess, what I'm getting at. Does that seem uncommon to you?
Well, I'm not sure how common it is, but I do think that it's a piece of evidence that the project was meant to be, and it was meant to be to have Brook White do it. Like I mentioned before, I think the image was perfect when I came into the picture. There was no need to change it. I don't think it could have been improved. It's very simple. It's straightforward. And yet it has a captivating energy about it, to use Brook's word. As you see it and you move around it and you see it under different light conditions, and you're inside looking out and looking up, and it's a marvelous experience. And if I were thinking about creating a memorial to someone, I would look at how can I communicate something through a structure that helps people realize what was magic about that person. And I don't think there's anybody who could have done a better job than Brook. I mean, he knew the guy like they were brothers.
Right. One of the things, though, about a project like this is we think about, of course, for generations, this was always bronze statues. And now that we see these different kinds of materials coming into play more and more with public sculptures in general, but with even these kinds of things, these kind of memorial tributes, is there how much did you have to think about the life of the piece, that you want it to be there forever? So how does it deal with the weather? How does it deal with the elements? Did you have to take certain kinds of steps in the materials in order to to make it last a long time, to give it that length of life?
Well, I'm sure it's going to be there for a month or two.
What's that?
I'm sure it will be there for a month or two more. Because we finished it and I was like, run away. So
but
no.
But you know what I'm saying? Like, are any of these elements more prone to suffering the elements than other kinds of things? Are there special kinds of things you have to do?
There are definitely more considerations for the glass. We
Yeah.
made it thicker. We made it, we cooled it down longer, which helps the strength of it. And those were major considerations. One of the things that I realized early on is I only know what I know.
Mhm.
And I knew that Dave understood stainless steel. And one of his areas of expertise are, 2-inch to 3-inch stainless steel sculptures. So the stainless steel will be there for a long time. And what I was trying to get Dave to understand, as much as I admire him as an artist, his stainless steel sculpture was meant to hold glass.
Mhm.
And the glass was the important thing. So to honor him, Dave, actually, the stainless steel may be the longer than the glass, but I know how to make the glass, and we can do more pieces because glass is a magical substance.
Yeah.
It's on the outdoors of buildings. You drink out of it. You're looking through it. It's just this crazy thing that Steve even said people take it for granted because it's so common.
Right.
And, it's just one of those things. And that leads us into how common it is, like common names like Johnson, Smith, and Jones. So Steve used to name pieces and give one name. It had 3 names. One described the color, one described the shape, and it was Johnson, Smith, or Jones. Well, I had somebody the other day say, what if hell hits it? I was like, it's going to have to be a hailstorm for a very long time because this glass is really thick. We did try to, it's hard to idiot proof anything, much less art.
Right.
I'm feeling confident. I had a good team. We did the things we needed to do. And if a piece of glass gets broken, I know somebody that can make some more.
Well, Dave, that's an interesting idea. Had you ever, when he talks about your metal structure, how to hold the glass, had you ever incorporated other elements like glass into something you've done before?
Not on that scale, but I've imagined it. And I have a friend who is a stained glass designer in Bloomington, Indiana, and we've talked for years about collaborating on something. It just never came to be. But I'm in total agreement. I think that the reflective qualities of stainless steel is just it's something that is up there with glass in my mind, because we put a random sanded finish on the stainless so that as you see it from any perspective, it's reflecting light from all different angles. And as you move around it, the light just dances across the stainless steel. And that should be there for a long time. And it should look terrific without any maintenance at all. Now, weather conditions being what they are in humid Kentucky, that may change, but it won't be drastic. It won't be like somebody has to come in and overhaul this piece. It was designed well from the beginning to last for a long time. And Brook didn't mention it, but we talked amongst ourselves and with other team members about the structural aspects of mounting the glass. And we went through a half a dozen different approaches and came around to something that was pretty much close to what we originally thought. And we have great confidence that steel is going to hold that glass right where it needs to be for a long, long time. You think about what's the worst thing that could happen in Kentucky, and it's a tornado. Well, if a tornado comes, all bets are off because, nobody knows what's going to happen to anything in a tornado. But if that should happen, Brook can do it again because he thought through everything, to get this one done.
Well, I would think, I'm not a meteorologist. I'm not out of my element here, but I always think about tornadoes creating pressure inside structures, as what we see when the houses kind of break up and stuff like that. And the way this has been built, it's got the room for the winds to go through it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
wind is not a problem.
Yeah. So this might be, maybe was built to survive a tornado.
Well, I'd like to see that, although I'd hate to see a tornado hit it, but it would be interesting to see.
I
Can
would kind of like to see the video from that.
Yeah.
And you know, you're thinking of these things and you do something on a bigger scale. And then one day I said to the contractor who knows everybody, and he actually built Steve's house, Bruce Cummings. I was like, did we just build a really big lightning rod? Like, oh, and this guy knows everything. He's like, I didn't think of that. And I was like, I thought of something somebody smarter than me thought of. So it is now regrounded so that the image I have is like from the Will Smith movie, The Aliens, July 4th, things imploding. And I was like, if that thing blows up and all those glass pieces shoot out, it could be a really cool picture. I don't want you to be there, and I would hate to have to repair it. But it is officially grounded with a super amazing, copper line going into the ground like 8 feet. So we took away the lightning rod aspect.
Well, and I'm not asking these questions because I thought for a minute you guys had left all this stuff to chance. I think it's interesting to think about, because I hear artists ask about, I want to do a sculpture, but I can't do stone and I can't do bronze and I can't, like, what are the kind of elements that maybe somebody can learn to work with or can employ that are just as durable? But, it's like one of Steve's pieces. It kind of looks fragile. Right. It's the nature of your design that you've tried to capture that quality of a glass vessel that he made, and you wouldn't want to drop that.
Well, one of the inspirations early on when his wife Shelley gave us the green light was, what would it be like to stand inside of a Steve piece?
Yeah.
All right. Many people across the country, across the world own Steve pieces, and you're looking at it from the outside. But if you could, be a little ant or, gnome or something in the middle of the piece and look up, you have this amazing neck, these curves, this contour. And that was the inspiration. Besides wanting to honor Steve. I mean, that was the thing, that this dude changed my life. I went to Center College to play soccer, government major. Come on. And I got to work for this person whose career was literally taking off right as I started working for him. And I'd like to say I've never had a real job. I got to work for him for 10 years, 19 to 29. Those are pretty formative years. And it's like, you either get it or you don't. And I understood what Steve did, but I thought that's how every artist's career was. No, it's not. Not everybody's a Steve Powell, that every piece you make is going to sell or it's going to be shown somewhere. And I just felt it was what I was supposed to do.
Right.
And then I found this team, and I knew of Dave and I met him a couple times. And then he's like, sure, I'm in. And then I met this other guy and I met this person. And suddenly, it literally took on a life of its own.
Well, and when you talk, I can't help but think too, to sort of get off the memorial for a little bit, that Stephen Powell was, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't his rise a part of kind of maybe a rise in the interest in glass art?
Completely.
Yeah.
And he would acknowledge that.
He was fueling it and it was fueling him, yeah. So that's one of the reasons he's such a star. It was that he was forming that movement.
But the hilarious, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but funny thing was, it was in the middle of Kentucky, Danville, Kentucky, where the center of Kentucky marker is.
Right.
Literally. And we're like, you got Seattle, you have Venice, you have Australia, you have these other places that are glass meccas. And Steve Powell created a dynamo here in the state of Kentucky.
Well, it often gets talked about that artists will do their best work. The old cliches are right. You got to go to New York. You got to go to Paris. You got to go to London. You got to go to one of those meccas. But yet, here's Steve Powell making his own sort of mini mecca in the middle of Kentucky.
Well, and Julius Friedman, I think Ed Hamilton, all these other great world-known artists would say Steve did it. but Steve brought the world to Kentucky.
Yeah.
Lino Tagliapietra, Dante Marioni, you can name artists left and right in the glass world that came to visit Steve at Center College in Danville, Kentucky. And that changed my life. That changed so many other students' life. There are 20 of us that worked closely with Steve that are still pursuing glass.
Well, and that's so Shay Rhodes is one of those people who's running.
And Shay, yeah, Shay at the University of Louisville is a prime, the number one prime example.
Yeah. I still love the picture of the you guys, the famous picture. People should go. I think if you just Google Stephen Roth Powell, it's one of the top 3 images that comes up.
Well, and Steve was most proud of that because it was at a pub in Corning, New York, and it was in the women's bathroom on the wall, that picture. And it was Steve on the stand, and it was me on the right with a blowtorch, and Paul Nelson and Shay Rhodes, who are all accomplished artists. And Steve's on the top of the pyramid making the piece. And it was a life-changing thing.
Okay. Well, guys, we're about here at the end of our time. I just want one more question to Dave, and that is, Dave, you talked about your stained glass friend in Bloomington. Does this make you want to go? Are you more excited now or motivated to try to have a collaboration with him after working with Brook on this piece with glass?
Well, I'm thinking about working more with Brook than anything.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you.
Well, I think we made a good partnership, and once you have a sense of the best way to work with someone, and it fits your own personality and so on. I mean, why make a change? Because I think we can do some wonderful things together.
Okay, well, then we'll probably be doing this interview again sometime on your next epic project.
All right. Well, thank you, Keith. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Brook White Jr. and Dave Caudill. And so if there's probably a very good reason to have visited Danville before, but now you can go to the very center of Kentucky to see this extraordinary piece. I mean, I think it's worth the trip just to go see the piece, and I'll be doing it. So the memorial tribute to Steve Roth Powell, very large sculpture and garden and benches, and you've heard them all describe it. So thank you guys for joining me.
Thank you.